Good afternoon. My name is Tamara Thompson. I am a maritime archaeologist with Wisconsin Historical Society. And thank you to everyone that came out today to Wisconsin Book Festival event to see our author, Gavin Frank, for his latest nonfiction book, Submersed, Wonder, Obsession, and Murder in the World of Amateur Submarines, which was published just this past June by Pantheon. Thank you to the Wisconsin Public Library Foundation, who is celebrating Wisconsin Public Library's 150 years of service to our community, and to all the sponsors for making this such an incredible celebration this year. We need to do a little housekeeping. I know that you've all been through this before, but since our discussion now is immediately after lunch, and you probably have fiddled with your phones, make sure you check and make sure that they've been switched back to silence for this session. The festival asked me to remind you that if you are sharing your experience on that you're having here on socials, to please consider adding the hashtag WIBookFest, all one word, when posting photos or information. And if you haven't acquired a book of Gavin Frank's Mystery to Me is selling the books just outside the DeLuca Forum here in the Discovery Building. And I believe you're going to be sticking around to sign them, for like probably a half an hour or so. Okay, so without further ado, I'm pleased to welcome Gavin Frank. He was born and raised in Illinois and earned a Bachelor of Arts degree from the University of Illinois-Urbana and went on for a Master of Fine Arts from Arizona State, from University of Arizona. Yes?
Arizona State.
Arizona State. Okay, I was like, oh, okay. Thank you for the correction. Besides this fascinating book today, he's the author of several other nonfiction books, including Flight of the Diamond Smugglers, about carrier pigeons used by diamond smuggling rings in coastal South Africa. I'll be purchasing that when I leave here today. This one was published in 2021 and was selected as one of NPR's best books of 2021 as a finalist for the 2021 Heartland Booksellers Award in Nonfiction. The Mad Feast, an eclectic tour through America's food, was a staff pick by the Paris Review, best book of 2015 by Plowshares, The Millions, and Paste Magazine, and featured in the Wall Street Journal, Savoir, and Entertainment Weekly. And another book, Preparing the Ghost, an essay concerning the giant squid and its first photographer, received accolades from New York Times as Editor's Choice, an NPR notable book, and book to watch out for by The New Yorker. He's also written several books of poetry, and his work appears widely in journals and magazines. After spending 17 years in the restaurant industry, he's now a professor of creative writing in the Master of Fine Arts program at Northern Michigan University. We were talking about Marquette just a little bit ago. Yeah, so at NMU, he's also the nonfiction hybrids editor for the literary magazine Passages North. So, the jacket description of his latest book, Submerged, Wonder, Obsession, and Murder in the World of Amateur Submarines, reads an exquisite lyrical foray into the world of deep-sea divers, the obsession and madness that oceans inspire in us, and the story of submarine inventor Peter Madsen's murder of journalist Kim Wall, a captivating blend of literary prose, science writing, and true crime. Besides this, the New York Post says that Gavin Frank dives into the subculture of DIY submarine enthusiasts. Frank hopscotches across the globe from British Columbia to Alaska to Denmark to interview a colorful cast about their calling. Frank questions his penchant for being obsessed with obsessives, but zealots are kind of his thing. It would be spoiling the story to reveal what his own deep dive, but we're going to spoil that, I think. I think I'm going to have to ask you about that. What it was like, and know that he journeys 2,000 feet under the sea and lives to write the story. So, thank you. Thank you for coming.
Thanks, Tamara.
So, Personally, I thought that this was a really captivating read. So again, I'm a maritime archaeologist, so I've spent a lot of my life underwater, and I think my fascination with wanting to be underwater and wanting to spend so much time there started when I was a kid. 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, everybody reads that. And then, I don't know, like 10 years ago, I heard that it had been retranslated. Yeah. And so I read that, and oh my God, it was so much better. So, I mean, that just really sold it for me. I mean, I was already working underwater, but, my God, that and a combination of the Cousteau films, and that really kind of spurred my imagination. So it's also weird when you work underwater, and we were talking about this earlier too, is there's how they say that there's 6 degrees of separation for everybody on the planet. Well, I think when you're working underwater in the underwater world, it's a lot closer than that, because you were asking me, did I know some of the people? And I do. I know some of them, but I also feel like my work is sort of sub-adjacent, because I don't use submarines. We use robotics, and these are the things that the DIY subbers were poo-pooing in the book. But but yeah, so I scuba dive, and I use ROVs and AUVs and that type of stuff for my work. But I'm wondering for you, you're a self-proclaimed you have self-proclaimed fear of the ocean. So how and this book puts you right there. How in the world did you ever overcome this to start this research?
So I didn't overcome it at all. Is the thing. I still have a fear of the ocean. I think it's bordering on healthy. Maybe it's still a little unhealthy. But we were talking I think a lot of writers and artists and scientists sometimes become absolutely fascinated with and obsessed with the very things that oftentimes scare them the most. Mm-hmm. They become the things that, at least for me, I become rabidly curious about. I'm really interested in examining oftentimes the objects of my own fear and phobias, and scratching at them in order to yield some kind of however illusory or elusive meaning kind of behind said phobia. So I still have a fear of the ocean, but when I'm immersed in a book project, I'm oftentimes able to tuck that phobia into the hull, so to speak, of the project itself. Mm-hmm. And the book project just kind of dampens and dilutes and cushions that fear. It's almost like turning my collar up against the wind and keeping my head down and going through. And I don't know if this is necessarily a good trait to have, but when I'm immersed in a project, I'm oftentimes oblivious to any of the dangers of a particular endeavor that I feel like I have to engage in, whether it's with the pigeon book, going onto an abandoned diamond mine patrolled by men with guns in coastal South Africa, or going down to 2,000 feet in uninsured, unlicensed, unclassed amateur submersible off of the coast of Honduras.
But the obsession with obsessives, yeah. What does that stem from?
I think I come from a long line of folks who have engaged with OCD to one degree or another, and so I feel like it's a language I understand. But oftentimes I'm obsessed with people who are obsessed with things that I am not yet obsessed with. I'm just really interested in the fabric of that particular obsession to see what perhaps it could tell us, however in microcosm, about the nature of human desire and human longing and human need and all of this. And so the great thing I think about what I do is, and I think I have an endless capacity to be surprised, and I'm a very curious person, is that I'm able eventually to become obsessed with the very things that my subjects oftentimes in my books are obsessed with. And so it's really tough oftentimes to detach from that world when I move on to a subsequent project.
Oh, wow. So The question that I had was, you vacillate back and forth between this DIY sub-community and then the Kimwall murder, and it made me wonder, kind of chicken egg, like what came first? Did you run into the murder and then start peeling back the layers of the onion, and then stumble onto this bigger community, or what came first?
Yeah, so my interest in the community came first. So, as Tamara mentioned, I spent many years working in the restaurant industry, and I'm originally from Chicago, but I was running a little breakfast restaurant adjacent to a bowling alley in Juneau, Alaska, for a bit, and pooled my tips, and ended up hopping in the car and doing a road trip around Alaska, and I encountered this really eccentric outsider artist living off the grid in the middle of the Alaskan woods, fashioning all of these dream machines amongst like the Sitka spruce trees. And among them was a DIY submersible. Again, this guy had no formal engineering training whatsoever, but he was so obsessed with sinking into the ocean that he fashioned this dream machine in the middle of the woods. And it basically looked like one backyard kiddie pool downturned on top of another, and seemed no more seaworthy than that. But he was determined that he was gonna go down in the thing. And I was really interested if he was an anomaly or if there were other folks out there who shared this kind of obsession. And I did a little bit of research and found that there was a small but mighty niche community of DIY submersible enthusiasts. And being obsessed with obsessives, I kind of wanted to hang out with these folks for, I don't know, let's say half a decade, and to kind of like scratch at the fabric of their obsession, to immerse myself in their community, to uncover all of the eccentric hierarchies and practices therein. And so that's what I thought the book was predominantly going to be about. And I also wanted to write about, I don't know, sea creatures and bioluminescence and wonder. But in my research, I kept bumping up against the story of this particular murder that took place in 2017 on Peter Madsen's amateur submersible off of the coast of Copenhagen, Denmark, and so where he murdered the Swedish journalist Kim Wall. And because I kept bumping up against that story in my research, and because so many folks in the DIY submersible community, that's all they wanted to talk about at the time. They kept bringing it up. They were so eager to talk about it, as if to get to the bottom of that story themselves, because a lot of these guys were friends with Peter Madsen. Yeah. They were on chat boards together, and they met up at conventions together and things. And so I felt like, because I kept bumping up against it, and because my subjects kept wanting to talk about it, I had to eventually reckon with it on the page.
Sure. I hope everyone has read it, because I'm going to give away some details. But I mean, you were able to string together so many details about Kim Wall's murder. I was kind of amazed at the extent of your research and the amount. I mean, minute by minute, what was happening, and some of them were, some of these ghastly details about him, researching, how best to get rid of bodies and how to kill someone and all of this beforehand. And I was just shocked when I think you revealed that he had tried to get a coworker to come out, and she didn't. Why then Kim Wall?
Yeah, so Kim Wall was a brilliant Swedish journalist, and she trotted the globe. I mean, reported out from Uganda and Cuba, and so she uncovered this really interesting story in her own backyard. And so Peter Madsen, who murdered Kim Wall on his DIY amateur submersible, the UC-3 Nautilus, was also kind of like a thwarted rocketeer. So he was interested in submersibles. He was interested in building amateur rockets. And he co-founded in the Refshaloon neighborhood of Copenhagen this corporation called Copenhagen Suborbitals with his friend, this this guy named Christian von Bengtson. And so Peter Madsen, and yeah, he is like as infuriatingly Nordically handsome as that name might. Christian von Bengtson. And Peter Madsen and Christian von Bengtson co-founded Copenhagen Suborbitals. And the goal was to build an amateur rocket to send Peter Madsen into orbit. It didn't really work, and Peter Madsen was a bit of a megalomaniac and a narcissist, and von Bengtson was a little bit too. And when you put a couple of narcissists together in business, oftentimes the divorce is a messy one. And Madsen was ousted because his behavior was so volatile, and so he opened up a spite business across the gravel parking lot from Copenhagen Suborbitals called Rocket Madsen's Laboratories. The two companies kind of launched in the amateur rocket building Copenhagen space race. And that's what Kim Wall wanted to write about, this eccentric space race that was happening in her own backyard. And so she kept trying to text Peter Madsen in order to get an interview, and he was ignoring her texts. When Peter Madsen's coworker with his sub endeavors, one of his female interns pulled out of an invitation that night. Kim Wall was just next on his list. She was an option. It had come out that he just decided he wanted to test his limits and to see if he could actually do it, if he could kill somebody. And I mean, he was always chasing extremity to various degrees. And when I was talking to a lot of other folks in the DIY submersible community, they, of course, were horrified at what Peter Madsen did, but they all, like a disproportionate number of them unequivocally just told me, we think he did it because he wanted to keep testing his limits. He was always pushing toward extremity, and he wanted to see what else he could do. And so he knew he had Kim Wall's number, and he reached out to her, and she thought she was going to get the interview. And yeah.
Oh my goodness! But how did you get access to? I mean, you're talking about the smell of the litigators, and I mean, like that detail is just, I mean, it's so vivid as putting the story together of this trial and all of the details that went into it. I mean, that was way over extreme for the amount of research. That was crazy. So.
I think this is where the channeling of the OCD comes in. So when I'm drafting, like I'm a maximalist anyway, but when I'm drafting, I'm just, I was telling Tamara, like an early draft of this book, which is like a slim 300 pages now, it was well over 1,000 pages. Like I couldn't stop researching.
I would read that though.
And,
I mean.
And I fell in love with all of my research. I really wanted to burrow into the minutiae of these stories because I wanted to tell it in a way that it hadn't been told before. And I specifically wanted to desensationalize the story of the murder because a lot of the ways that it was told journalistically, it was really lurid. I think it committed that cardinal sin that a lot of true crime does, where it completely deplatforms the victim and kind of glorifies the murderer and things. And I kind of wanted to do the opposite. I just talked to so many people.
Yeah.
I went out to Copenhagen just a few different times and met up with folks who were involved and interviewed them there. I did the same walk Kim Wall did from, from a party that she was throwing with friends the night she was murdered to Peter Madsen's laboratory, and then from there to the dock where UC3 Nautilus was. And I just did that walk repeatedly, collecting details. I went through court transcripts. I translated court transcripts from both Norwegian and
like, did you have
Danish.
to learn or did you hire someone?
No, like I had help with folks on the ground there. So I was at like the Saxo Institute at the University of Copenhagen, and folks there helped me a bit because Google Translate was messy. But I had a lot of fun with it.
Understand that,
there were, I got access to text messages that Kimball was having with the murderer and with Peter Madsen and with members of her family.
I mean, some of that was just, like I said, I was absolutely surprised the amount of detail that went into that. So congratulations on
being
collecting
obsessive.
that, but also on getting it past the editors to actually get it in, and they didn't say, hey, cut this out, slim this down. And I mean, it was, again, a really vivid story, very sad. So I'm going to circle back to the P-subbers. So yeah, we talked about, so I'm a scuba diver, and I use ROVs in that on shipwrecks, not subs. But you know, I found myself seeing a lot of similarities between the P-subbers. So this DIY community that you chronicle, and especially in like a subset of divers that again are trying to go very deep and to push their limits, and in some cases they're using rebreathers, they're creating their own life support, and then you know, and again they're self-testing. So with very probably slim to none as far as engineering backgrounds as well, and as you can probably guess, it's a niche group and very male dominated, but their physical descriptions of like the people that I know and interact with are so similar to the folks that are that you describe in the DIY community, and also their behavior, so this their bro club and antics at the conventions and that. So I kind of felt like I already knew them. and what I found very interesting about your description of them is the true feeling of community. And that it didn't seem like they were necessarily competing with one another, but there was more of a synergy to innovate and to progress, and help each other solve problems. And we don't see that. It's all a competition in scuba. So so and occasionally I occasionally see these guys at boat ramps and around the Great Lakes. So I was up in Manitowoc not too very long ago, and there was a guy backing his sub in, and we're watching him across the parking lot, and I have a volunteer that was with me, kind of a retired guy named Bob, and Bob was like, I'm gonna go talk to him, and the guy, like, you could tell he didn't want us gawking at him, and and any questions that we asked him were these questions that I'm sure he's answered 1,000 times before, but can I guess I'm describing this accurately, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
And you met a lot of interesting people in that community. Can you pick out a couple of them, like in particular, that really had an impact on you that you could describe?
Yeah. So probably my favorite person, and I was talking to you about her in the hallway. So it is very male-dominated, the community, but Shanice Stopnitsky is one of the few female members of the P-sub or Personal Submersible Consortium, and I just adored her. She was one of my favorite people, like who I've ever met, and she really engages it a lot more than a lot of the guys. From just a place of unbridled, infectious, electric wonder. Just like, I absolutely loved her. And so Shani has spent well over, and maybe you have too, over 2 years of her life in aggregate underwater now, and she talked to me about enduring time on the surface. Like she doesn't feel like this is her place. Like under the water, like that is her place. That's where she wants to be. And I was just so fascinated with that. And I understand a little bit after I did my own dive. And so now Shani is busy with a lot of crowdsourcing funds, scouting locations off of the Indonesian coast to build an underwater house. And she wants to, spend as much time as possible underwater, living in this underwater house. You'll need to scuba to it. And when she's not going to be, inhabiting that space, she's going to let it out as an artist residency, like an under the sea artist residency, I think. And so she was really interesting. So I really enjoyed her. Another one of my, I don't know if favorite. Kind of have a complicated relationship with Carl Stanley, the captain who took me down on his own amateur submersible. Carl's from Jersey, and then he built this amateur submersible in a defunct airport hangar in rural Oklahoma, and had it towed out to Honduras for a couple of reasons. One is Roatan, Honduras is one of the places in the world that has so much deep water so close to shore. And two, in Honduras, as compared to, say, the US, Carl didn't need to undergo the rigorous certification, licensing, and insuring processes in order to monetize his sub and take folks down to 2,000 feet, as he would, elsewhere. So those were, just to name a couple.
Yeah, so I'm gonna ask a couple questions about Carl Stanley.
Mm-hmm.
So I read the story about Carl Stanley's dog Cujo,
Yeah.
and I thought, oh my God, I didn't need to hear that.
Yeah.
So I'm like, why did you put me through the torture of reading about his dog? So the dog, I think his beloved dog. The morning of your submarine adventure with him, the dog had passed away. It was under a neighbor's porch, and he's pulled out, and he relates to you that he decided he was going to butcher the dog and sever his head and leave it for worms so that he could use it to decorate his porch, I guess. And I sat with this information for a long time. And again, I told you I read the book and then I listened to it on my vast drives across the state again. And I was like, I get it. I think you're trying to draw a parallel to Peter Madsen and his butchering of Kim Wall, and try to lead me back to say, well, to again feel like. Again, I'm glad that you took the experience, but I think maybe knowing that about Kim Wall and then seeing him, affect this on his dog, I think for me, it would have made me think twice about getting in the submarine.
Yeah. So
There's a lot to unpack, but yeah, I
think I left that detail in there for a couple of reasons. Yeah, I think there is, of course, that sly resonance with what Madsen did, but also, I mean, in a simpler way. So here I am, I had a panic attack the night before I went down on Carl's sub, and the very thing he tells me just before I get onto it is his dog Cujo, a pit bull, died, crawled off under a neighbor's house and died.
This was a beloved dog.
Beloved dog. Carl dragged it out, cut the dog's head off with a hacksaw, and then tossed the head to the fireworms, who would eat it to the bone so he could mount the skull sentimentally, he said, onto the front facade of his house next to like a few other skulls that were already there. There was a steer's skull, there was a horse's skull, there was a pig's skull on the side of his house. He was obsessed with skulls and adorning his house with it. The whole ocean-facing facade of his house was made out of a dead coral reef. So the place looked like some condemned castle of bone. And so that was the portal through which, like that story, like I was passing to climb into this guy's sub. And so I felt like I had to leave that detail in there. It didn't help also that the night before I met my dive, I met Carl for dinner at this place called Loretta's Island Cooking. If you're ever in Roatan, Honduras, it's the best garlic conch on the island. And he brought up Peter Madsen to me. I didn't bring up the murder. And he was like, hey, did you hear about that murder that took place off of the coast of Denmark on somebody's DIY submersible? And I was like, yeah, Carl, I did. And he's like, isn't it strange that I'm a DIY submersible builder and you're a journalist and you're getting onto my sub tomorrow? And I was like, yeah, it's a little strange. And then I tried, you're not into any of that, are you, Carl? And he said, no, I could never murder you. I could never murder you because then I would be a copycat. And I'm not a copycat. I'm not a copycat. And he was just speaking to his originality. Carl does, Carl is singular. Carl treads new ground. Carl does not tread on ground that has been trod upon before. But that's, why he was telling me he wasn't going to murder me because it's been done before.
Yeah.
and so that's in the book too. And so all of this made me nervous. I thought more than twice about lowering myself through the hatch opening, and but again, tucked it into the confines of the project.
I just thought it was so fascinating, like for a lot of these people, how you cover their and you evaluate personality traits and look for commonalities, and again, of course, with the community, how many people is this actually? I mean, how prevalent are these submersibles around the world?
Yeah, well, simply like the P-Subs consortium, and there are more DIY submersible enthusiasts beyond just this consortium that is organized and has chat boards and their own website and yearly conventions. There are 200 plus. And things, and so yeah, there's quite a few, I guess. I mean, they're small, and things too. So I mean, one of the most interesting, and again, the community is not monolithic, I mean, some of them are like wonderful and approach it from a place of wonder. Some of it just like geeking out on the tech stuff, which is really wonderful to watch too. And then there's a faction that's a little less, I found a little less savory to me. Yeah, so a lot of the book is dealing with both the wondrous and dark sides of the human exploratory impulse. Yeah. But because the community is so insular, and they really talk about their obsession only with other obsessives, they tend not to find the obsession strange or unusual or fascinating. They think it's just everyday. And so the fact that I found it as an outsider absolutely fascinating, they were fascinated with the fact that I found it fascinating. Mm-hmm. And so I thought that was an interesting trait, that they don't,
they bring you in.
That they bring me in, but they also don't think of themselves as extraordinary, which is kind of, they think of themselves as, this is fine, this is every day, this is just like driving a car.
Great. Okay, so I hate to bring it up because I know, like, even in underwater archaeology presentations that I give, someone always, evokes Titanic. Right. So, and then it just sucks everything out of the room, and you end up talking about that and nothing else. But you do cover the Titan disaster in your book, tragic loss of 5 persons aboard. That was like 2.5 years ago now, we had talked about this. So like I work for state government. I was on soft money for a lot of years, and for some time I worked at Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution when we ran out of money here. I still had to pay my mortgage, right? So I went out there. I worked on Titanic, and I ended up meeting some people like P.H. Nargile, who was one of the ones that perished on Titan. He reviewed my work. I'm gonna start crying, and he was with RMS Titanic Incorporated, foremost expert on this, and he'd come through the lab and look over my shoulder and see what I was doing. I did meet him, and you may know that this last week NTSB put out their investigative report on Titanic. Did you get a chance to read that?
I haven't read it
yet. I haven't read it because I've been on the road. Yeah. But I skipped to the end, right? So I just picked up the good parts, the conclusions and the recommendations, which is probably not anything that anyone is surprised about. They had a separation in their laminates, and they talk about which dives it actually happened in, and engineering failures and so on. But you. You write about Stockton Rush, the owner of OceanGate, maker of Titan, and this controversy that surrounds him, and and his fear that he wanted to insert himself into the Titanic narrative. Can you discuss some of that?
Yeah. So a lot of that information I gleaned from an interview with Carl Stanley, the guy, who cut his dog's head off and took me down in Honduras. He and Stockton Rush were very close. They were friends, and in fact, Carl was, according to Carl, one of Stockton Rush's guinea pigs, who went down on an earlier iteration of Titan.
I believe it was deeper than Titanic too, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was down to, goodness, it was like 20,000,
20,000 leagues under
Yeah,
the sea.
yeah, right, or like 18,000
Yeah.
feet or something
Yeah.
like that. Yeah, and it was off the coast of the Bahamas as a test dive, to get down to, for the Titanic dive and things. And Carl was actually one of the first in the community to ring the alarm bells directly to Stockton Rush about Titan, and just was sending him these frantic emails. The hull is obviously getting spongy. Like, I mean, you really need to rework this. Carbon fiber, as a material is not viable, at least not yet. And all of this in Stockton Rush essentially just went ahead with rebuilding it in a very similar way, and anyway, using carbon fiber and much, to his own detriment. But Carl, in talking to Stockton Rush, believed that Stockton Rush was so obsessed with the Titanic and Titanic lore that he was desperate to insert himself into the narrative, into the story of Titanic that we tell about it, to the point that he was willing to put his life and the lives of others at risk in order to do it. Now, I don't know if, I can't verify this, but Carl believes that Stockton Rush was a brilliant engineer and in part knew that this was going to eventually happen. And he was willing to die and to kill in order to be part of that narrative. That was Carl's interpretation. Again, I can't verify that necessarily, but this is somebody who was very intimate with Stockton and heard him speak about this.
So one of my students was in the engineering department here, and he really wanted to work in deep ocean. He went out to the Ocean Gate headquarters out in Washington, and I had an interview, and he said that there were, even in his interview, he sensed that there were some safety concerns, and there was some overlooked protocol that should have been necessary and should have been standard, and so he ended up not taking the job. He's working in the North Sea now, But there were some statements made, like at some point, safety is a pure waste. I mean, if you want to be safe, don't get out of bed. I mean, it just doesn't leave a whole lot of space for middle ground there. Yeah. And so, do you have any further on that?
Yeah. He was saying things like, regulation is anathema to innovation and all of this. And he just saw himself as like outside the regulatory laws. And a lot of folks, even in the DIY submersible community, I really couldn't stand him. And were speaking out against this. Basically, like, Stockton, you are going to kill people. I don't know, did you ever run into Scott Waters, the Pisces 6 guy who's operating out of Tenerife in the Canary Islands? So this is another DIY submersible enthusiast who fashioned his own submersible in Salina, Kansas. Like so far from any ocean, and now, of course, he, in order to operate it, he moved to the Canary Islands and is living on Tenerife. But he and Stockton knew one another, and he also was seeking out work briefly with Ocean Gate, and he went to Ocean Gate's headquarters, and Scott just couldn't believe what he saw there. He said like Ocean Gate was like a disaster, not only in the way that it was run, but like a physical disaster. Like, it was a mess. Like, the whole place looked like a child's bedroom. It was chaos. And when he saw that, he knew, he couldn't work for an organization like that. Yeah.
So, one of the things that came out of the NTSB report was a call for further regulation, which was something that the P-subbers, which you mentioned in your book, were really lamenting as far as future regulations on their hobby. Have you heard from any of them? Have you about this? Can you talk about any discussions about safety mandated requirements? Do you think there should be mandates on personal submersibles?
I do. Because oftentimes they are taking down other people at these P-subs conventions. They were taking down visitors and things like that too.
This is one of the things that came out of the Titanic report, was that they're redefining what a passenger vessel is,
Right.
so that it'll be inclusive to the rules for those will be inclusive on these subs. So.
Right. So there apparently, you know, like according to some of the folks I spoke to in the community, they could still go down themselves, but they can't take their spouses, they can't take their children, they can't take their grandchildren without meeting certain safety requirements, and they're very upset about that. Like almost blanketly, they're incredibly upset about it. There is. I mean, not amongst all of the community, but there is a bit of a libertarian ethos that you see in a lot of folks, and they feel like if they're taking down, you know, if it's just their family and their intimates and their friends, but of course, oftentimes at these conventions, it's more than that. They offered to take me down again, but after I went down on the dive with Carl, I declined because one, Titan had happened. So when I went,
It's on your mind, you know.
right, yeah, and I made a promise to my mom and my wife that I wouldn't do it again. And I didn't want to break that promise. So, but yeah, I mean, most of them were very upset about these discussions to the point where they penned some very excited, let's say, letters and things like that. And I guess there is going to be somebody from like the Coast Guard and things like that visiting the next P-Subs convention, which is going to be in Isla Mirada.
Oh.
Yeah.
Yeah, the thing, you know, that again, I understand some of their concern because again, if you regulate or over-regulate how things are constructed, you, in essence, curb innovation.
Yeah.
But again, it can't come at the expense of safety. Right.
Yeah, there's got to be some kind of middle ground.
Yeah. So I really liked. Again, you had somewhere in the book you had a terminology discussion about the difference between submerging and submersed, and I thought that was really poignant. But you know, to be enveloped in this environment, not just to go down, but to be there, be present, be part of this, you know, this underwater, and to shut off from the outside world. It's sort of this transformation that happens, and I was hoping that you could spend some time. We had talked a little bit about it outside, but just kind of the after you got over the fear of going down with Carl Stanley and getting to the bottom, when he turned off the lights and or when he turned them back on and you were experiencing the wildlife, the fauna that was around you, how that changed you?
I mean, the poet Alberto Rios has this quote, and this is a poet saying this: "Words are our weakest hold on the world." Any adjective would be inadequate to describe what it was like to be down there. So of course, you know, just before we went under and just before the water bubbled up over the portholes, I had like a mild panic attack, like in the space of that submersible. But the moment the water came up and that we were under, it just kind of steamed away. And I was.
This is a very small space.
It
you
is.
showed me some pictures of it. It's very tiny.
The sphere I was in was about the size of an industrial laundry dryer. I was hunched like this, but there was a porthole at my feet and a porthole in front of me. And again, just like once the water bubbled up and some of the sea life started emerging, when all of these bioluminescent creatures started whirling like galaxies out of these portholes, I just became unstuck from any kind of worry or fear or phobia. I felt unstuck from my own body. I felt unstuck from time. I felt unstuck from the surface. I was down for about 3 hours, but it could have been 3 minutes or it could have been 3 days. Yeah. You know, and it just didn't matter. You know, just kind of time operated with its own watery rules, you know, at depth. And so, I'm haunted by it. I'm haunted by that experience. I want to feel that again. in a way. So I could see, yeah, how this could become very much an addiction. And I think about it a little. I think about it a little bit every day. So I ended up. I was lucky enough to see like a Triassic era 6-gill shark, a shark that hasn't changed a bit since the Triassic era. And what I was told is, and you might know more about this, is that they rarely come up above 2,000 feet.
Wow.
And so. They're hard to see. They're incredibly hard to see. Like, you have to get down to 2,000 feet somehow to see these, and I was able to see one. These electric blue conger eels that were just whipping like windsocks. Yeah, swimming by. Creatures I mean, I don't know if we have names for them. Fish that look like flowers that prefer to walk along the surface of a coral bed like on legs rather than swim. Like they're just sitting there walking, these flower-like fish. I mean, it was just absolutely incredible. And yeah, wouldn't trade it. I'm really, really glad I did it.
Well, I'm glad you did too. I think
Thanks.
everyone deserves an experience to be underwater and experience all that's there. I mean, it's a large part of our planet, and a lot of people think of water as sort of this impedance to travel. So we're at our time for our discussion, but we can go out to the audience. I think we have a microphone to go around. If you have any questions, we have about 10 minutes for questions. 15, I lied. So.
Wonderful talk. Thank you so much. That was just like super fascinating, and I'm like, yeah, personal submersibles, amazing. I've been fortunate enough to have the opportunity to experience like scuba diving, and especially like night diving, where you have this kind of like some of that experience that you described. But I've also had the chance to work with some researchers out of Woods Hole who use the remote submersible ROVs, like the remote operated vehicles. Do you feel like these are like different domains? Because it's like, would like, if you suggested to one of these like creators that like, oh, couldn't you just like take a drone down there and like look at what you wanted to look like, versus that experience of being down there, like, would it be like kind of like an insult to them that you would suggest that you should send a robot down instead, kind of thing?
So there was a guy I interviewed for the book, but his chapter wound up sadly on the cutting room floor of the book. Again, it was 1,000 pages. You know, I needed to make it manageable. A guy named River Dolphy, and we were talking about him just outside. He works for a corporation called Phoenix, and he was the guy who was called to pick up the pieces of Titan with an ROV. And he got the call. He was camping, you know, on some mountaintop in Maine with his girlfriend. And he woke up and his cell phone, you know, blew up with all of these messages about Titan and things, and so they immediately had to pack up the tent, and he was sent out. But he's also a DIY submersible enthusiast, and so I feel like there is a lot of overlap there too. Like so, like with River, yeah, I don't think he would consider it to be a different domain at all. But he is. He's interested in a lot of things. So yeah, I mean, he's doing the ROV work. He's building a DIY submersible. He's also part of like an avant-garde punk marching band. And he and his dad built. His dad collects antique train whistles and ship horns, and they figured out a way to hook it up to an old pipe organ. And they built what River is convinced is the loudest instrument ever made. It's in his dad's basement. Yeah, so I think these guys are, I think there's a lot of overlap there. I don't think it's that clubby necessarily. Like, do you like?
I think that, you know, I think for the DIY sub guys, it's probably that they create their own rules, and their goal and fixation is getting themselves down there. But I think for the science community, it's right tool, right job. And I do think that a lot of the engineering, the innovation that goes into what they're doing can be applied to, I don't know, putting a camera or a small robot or something on the bottom. So I guess it just, to me, depends on what you want to do.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, you create the rules to your own game, right? So.
So I'm curious, of the people that you interviewed for this book, did you see any themes for like how they got into it? Because you're talking about like folks who don't necessarily have a scientific background or an engineering background, and I'm interested in like what convinces people, what takes them from, oh, it'd be really cool to be at the bottom of the ocean, I read 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, to I am going to try to get myself to the bottom of the ocean. Like there's a lot of steps there, and was it just different for everybody in terms of what got them started, or?
So I think for a certain faction of the populace, and maybe a small faction of the populace, because this is a small community, there aren't a lot of steps between I've read 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea and I am going to build my own submersible. I mean, of course there are steps, you know. I mean, a lot of, so one of the guys that I interviewed, you know, it was exactly that. It was 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. It was Jacques Cousteau. We were talking about this, you know, in the lobby. And then so they were just kind of dreamy kids. And when, you know, they got a little money under their belt as adults, you know, they still didn't unhook from that dreaminess. And so this one guy hit YouTube. Like that was literally the next step. Like, how do you build your own submarine? And just tumbled down the rabbit hole. He went from there, and like 2 years later, he was inventing his own furnace and doing his own annealing, and yeah, like just like all of this stuff. He was just kind of brilliant and fixated and narrowly focused, and was able to, devote, you know, his attention to this kind of thing because he didn't unhook from the dreaminess. So again, I think for a certain faction of the populace, it very much is that. You know, we're inspired by something we see as a kid, and some of us just never let that go. So, I kind of want to like turn that question on to you, like because like I'm interested. Like, what was it like for you? What was your journey? Because you mentioned 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea too. And,
so I begged all through high school to learn to scuba dive, and my dad kept saying no. So I ended up taking it as a class here at UW-Madison, and then I never let it go because I was studying genetics, so I was going to be a lab rat. But making the jump to working on, I knew once I took that class that I wanted to do everything I could to work underwater. I ended up working in the geology and geophysics department here. I worked in submerged mines in the southwestern part of the state. And then the woman I was working for, Jillian Banfield, won the MacArthur Genius Grant. And she said the best thing that happened to me would be, for my work, would be to move to Berkeley. So she did, and the lab left. And I was picked up by the State Historical Society without any experience working in underwater archaeology. And I was allowed to do a lot of things, like go work with National Oceanographic and Atmospheric Administration. I went out to the USS Monitor. I worked as an observer out there to try to, again, build up my understanding. But this was back again. I'm old. This was the days when, to be an archaeologist, you had to have 10 years of experience working under an archaeologist. And today, there's Secretary of the Department of Interior standards for being an archaeologist. So the way my path would never have been a path for somebody, but I do everything that I can to be underwater too. I kind of understand that passion. But again, I will use all of the tools available to me. So if I can't dive there or snorkel there or look at it, I will use robotics or other means to see what's on the bottom. Yeah. Any other questions? Oh, come on. I have one. What's next? What is your next project?
Oh, God. So it has nothing to do with the sea whatsoever. It is actually the most memoirish, like I've gotten, in a very long time. I don't like writing about myself. That's not my natural instinct. I typically turn my gaze outward. I'm very much aware of myself as a filter for the things with which I'm obsessed, but I don't love the self as a subject. Self as filter, okay. Self as subject, not so much, because when the subject is both the self and the filter, things get really strange and kinked and, funhouse mirror-y in a way. But so I'm compelling myself to turn my gaze outward a little bit. So some of this next project is dealing with the ways in which music is used as a tool of control in cults and cult-like systems. So yeah, nothing to do with
anything cult will sell. Oh my god.
Yeah. So nothing to do with underwater, unless whale song comes in. I'm not sure, but so it's engaging that kind of thing.
Well, thank you.
Yeah.
So you're going to be out at the book table, right? So if anybody. Yeah. You have one more thing to say?
Did we have one more question?
Oh, one more question. Sorry.
Yeah, I didn't know if we had time.
No, we do. We have like 2 more minutes.
Okay,
So go.
cool.
But they told us that there's nothing afterwards, so we can just go on and on if you really want it.
I guess this was kind of just a point of curiosity on, so like we're talking about like submarines as vehicles. Are there any people within this community that you encountered that have like aspirations or projects for like underwater habitats? Like I've seen like underwater hotels, and like I've even looked up like videos of like, oh, views from like those kind of like aquarium views where you see that seascape, or like what is it, Dr. No from James Bond has the huge like shark tank behind him. So does anyone here have like a basement that happens to have an underwater view or anything?
So Shanice Stopnitsky, who I mentioned a little bit earlier, is building out, scouting out locations off of like the Indonesian coast to fashion an underwater house. So she's working on building an underwater house that you're going to have to scuba to get to. And when she's not inhabiting that space, she's going to like let it out as an artist residency. That's her idea, at least. So she's getting a lot of money through, crowdfunding sources and things like that. And so I hope she does it. I hope she does it. I might get my scuba certification because I want to like hang out there and like work on a book or something, if that's like a little artist residency and things like that.
Find me.
But yeah, so she's working on that. She was one of the ones I personally encountered. But I know a lot of folks, like the wealthy contingent of the submersible community, they oftentimes, and you hear this like in Muskian fashion, folks talking about Mars as like a failsafe once we've depleted the Earth. You do hear a lot of folks from like the wealthy contingent in the submersible community talking about the sea as a failsafe. Once we've depleted the Earth, we could retreat to the sea. And I wonder if by we, they just mean the uber wealthy. So we'll see. Yeah. Thanks, you all. Thanks so much.